everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up of all the books I have read in the last 2 months, so March and April. In the past 2 months I have read in total 15 books, where 10 of them was in March and 5 of them have been here in April. I have read 1 thriller, 7 historical / literary fiction, 3 romances, 2 fantasies, 1 nonfiction, and 1 sci-fi. So we have a bunch of different genres to talk about in this video. I don't know if I've ever read more genres in this span of like a short amount of time, because like sci-fi is something I never read, nonfiction something I never read, but it happened. But I guess let's just start with all the books that I read in March. The first 2 books are a part of a video, so maybe I'll just talk a little bit more shortly about them. They're in my reading the highest versus lowest rated book on my physical TBR. And first off, I read Lies Like Poison, which is a YA murder mystery. It's about 4 friends, and one of the friends, his stepmother, gets killed. Another one of the friends get arrested for the murder, but she swears she didn't do it. But her name is Belladonna, and there was found a leaf of belladonna in stepmother's tea, which is what killed her, because belladonna is poisonous. So she gets arrested for the murder, and now the other friends are trying to figure out who actually did it and why would they frame their friend, or did she actually do it. I rated this book 2.75 stars. I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was quite boring, and while it was a mystery, it had just too much other things going on, and I feel like it could have been solved very quickly, and it was very unrealistic that the police was just like doing absolutely nothing, and they could have definitely solved it way faster. And then I also just found it a little bit cringy, but I think it's because I can just really tell the older I get, the more YA books do not hit home for me. And this book was definitely a case of that. I could just tell that they were so young and childish in their thought process and whatnot, like so naive. So I did not connect with that book. I mean, it had a low rating on Goodreads, which is why I read it in general, and I agree with that low rating, unfortunately. But then I read the highest rated book, which was The Women by Chris and Hannah, and that had a high rating, and it deserved its high rating because I rated it 4.5 stars. In the book we follow Frankie, who is a nurse, and her brother goes off to war in the Vietnam War to join the army, so she decides she wants to do the same, but as an army nurse. So she signs up, but her parents are not happy about it, and she's so confused because they are so proud of their son, but they're not proud of their daughter. They're actually embarrassed by it, and they want her to not do it. But she ends up going, and the first half of the book we follow Frankie in Vietnam, seeing these horrible things of people losing their limbs and all these people in the hospital, and she's just on a rush and go, and also making friendships and some love interests as well while she's in Vietnam. And then in the second half of the book we follow Frankie when she goes back home and finds out that her parents were actually lying about where she even was, and told people she was like off studying in Europe because they were that embarrassed about it. And Frankie really struggles with coming back home, and she has PTSD, and she's just really struggling to figure out how to just live a normal life. And she tries to get help, but people dismiss her instantly. Anytime she says something about the war or that she could have PTSD or whatever, people just look at her and say, women weren't in Vietnam. Like, you weren't there. You were not in the war. You did not see anything horrible. You just need to get married, have some babies, and live your life. So she gets no help whatsoever. And this book is about the war. It definitely is a historical fiction, and you will learn more. At least I learned more about the Vietnam War than I did originally. But it's also about the female friendships that she forms with these women while she's in Vietnam that she still has when she gets back home, and how they like lift each other up and they fight for what is right. And this was just a beautiful story that left me in tears by the end of it. The next book I read is a very popular book, and it's the sci-fi one I read, which is Project Hail Mary, and the movie just recently came out. I haven't watched it, but I do want to at some point. But if you don't know, if you're one of the few who haven't read Project Hail Mary or watched the movie, it is about Ryland Grace, who at the beginning of the book wakes up in space. He has no idea why he's there, who he even is. He doesn't know his own name, his nationality, anything like that. Like, he's completely confused. He's just in this spaceship, and he doesn't even really know he's in space to begin with. But the 2 people who were there with him, the other astronauts, are unfortunately dead in the time that they have taken to travel to where they are in space. And slowly he starts figuring out things and his memory starts coming back, and he realizes he's there to save the earth. And because his two companions are dead, he's now alone to do this because the sun is dying. There are these little things that are slowly eating away at the sun, making it colder. So in a specific amount of years, the sun will get so cold that everyone on earth will die because everything will freeze over and people will die from starvation and also just hypothermia. So he has to figure out how to do this and how to stop it. It was a very interesting book, but I rated it 3.75 stars because I know it's sci-fi and I know I was getting into a sci-fi, but for me personally, there was way too much science in it. And I know it's a science fiction, but I just didn't realize the science would be so described to me in so many words, like in the math of it all. Like I just felt like there was so much description of that, like MC square equals this, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, I don't care. Like that took up way too much of the book. And then I also was quite disappointed in the way it ended, so it just didn't leave me like satisfied with how it ended. So that's the reason for my lower rating. Next up, I read Just Friends by Hiii, and I actually made a whole reading vlog of that book if you want to see like my reactions and opinions while I was reading the book. And if you don't know who Hiii is, she is a YouTuber and a booktuber. She makes book content and she recently published a book. It came out in March. It is a second chance romance where we follow Blair, who moves back home to her hometown after she finishes college because her aunt is dying, and she grew up living with her mom and her aunt in their aunt's house. To Blair, her aunt is a very important person. She's basically another parent figure for her. But in this small town, when she moves back, her ex-boyfriend, her childhood best friend and love, Declan, still lives in this small town, and she actually ends up applying to a coffee shop not knowing that the manager is actually Declan, and now she is his employee. Blair and Declan haven't seen each other for the past 4 years, so the whole time that she was away at college. And you don't know why they stopped talking, which is very normal for a second chance romance. And there are some flashback chapters where we see them in high school, like when they were together, before they were together, and also when they got together. And you obviously at some point also see what happened for them to not talk. And I rated this book 3.75. I actually liked it more than I thought because I'd seen so many negative reviews of this book. And while I do agree with some of it, I think the writing in the first like 20-25% was a bit weird, and like there were used some big or more fancy words that didn't really fit into the rest of the writing style or the sentences. But after the like 25% mark, I feel like that stopped, and for the rest of the book it just felt like a normal second chance fun coastal summer romance that I would honestly recommend to people. I don't think it was that bad as people make it out to be, but obviously reading is subjective and maybe they just genuinely did think that the book was that bad, but I didn't. After that, I read No Matter What by Sara, which was a very highly anticipated read for me. It came out in March, and I read both of her other books last year, and I enjoyed both of them, so I was really excited to read this book and very intrigued by the premise of it, because in the book we follow Ross and Vin, who are already married, which is very rare to read a romance, or at least I don't think I really read a romance where the couple is already together and they're in a long-term relationship. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But for Ross and Vin, a year ago they were in a traumatic accident, and since then they've not been the same. Both of them kind of have PTSD and are struggling with the changes that happened after this accident, and their marriage is kind of rocky. They don't really know how to talk to each other, and they're just kind of living in their apartment, separate lives, kind of going in silence, not knowing how to talk to each other. So Ross ends up finding solace in this art class that she randomly stumbles upon, and she meets these new people that she forms friendships with, and she learns new things about herself and how to view the world by being in this art class. And slowly they start like opening up to each other and talking about some of the things that went wrong or why it ended up going the way that it did. And I absolutely loved this book. It is a romance, but it's also a little bit of literary fiction. Like it is more than just your typical romance, and I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was so good. I love Sara's writing. She really knows how to do it. She writes romances that are a little bit different. Like even if they have the same kind of formula sometimes as another romance, they are different, because I read one of her other books, which is an accidental pregnancy trope, but instead of the love interest being the guy who got her pregnant, it's another guy. And I thought that was really interesting as well, because I have never read that either. I love her writing and her little unique twists on typical romance tropes. But after No Matter What, I read A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman, and I actually wasn't like planning on reading it. It wasn't really on my radar, but one of my friends have been back in her reading corner and she's been reading a lot. So she read A Man Called Ove in like one day and said I had to read it. So obviously I picked it up immediately because I love Frederick Bachman. I've talked about it before. I love Beartown. I love My Friends. This one I didn't love just as much. I rated it 4 stars and I was actually thinking I was going to rate it 3.5, but then towards the end I started liking it more. But in the book, before I start talking about it, trigger warning for this book is suicide and like suicidal thoughts. No actual suicide happens in the book, but it is talked about a lot because our main character Ove, he wants to die and he tries actually multiple times and plans it out in his head and gets the things that he needs to get to commit suicide. He's portrayed very grumpy, like he is like the police of their little street they live on. People are not allowed to drive on the street. You have to park in like a specific parking lot and then you can walk down the street, and anytime anyone does anything out of order, he will tell them. He likes order and he likes the things that they should be how they are, and he's a very like grumpy man. My biggest issue with this book, and the reason why I didn't love it as much as I maybe could, was because I had a little bit of a hard time with the portrayal of Ove, because he's supposed to be this old grumpy man, but he's only 59 years old. And I know my parents are a little bit like older than the norm. My parents are in their 60s, so for him to be younger than my parents, I just couldn't picture him as this old grumpy man. I mean, the grumpy part, sure, you can be grumpy at no matter what age, but you know, like there's that specific stereotype of a grumpy old man, you know? And I just can't picture that when he's younger than my dad. And I don't see my parents as old. Like, I know they are like older, but they're not actually like old. They can do anything really. So I had a hard time picturing that, but that's obviously like, again, the subjective thing is it's me, because I can't picture it because of my parents. Because obviously I do know my parents are older, they're grandparents. I have a niece and a nephew and they are grandparents, but I can't picture it in the way that here he was supposed to be old. I think maybe if he had been 10 years older and he was like 69 or 70, I could have pictured it a little bit better. But basically what I was saying, that he wants to die, but every time he plans it, a neighbor or someone on his street gets in the way and like needs his help in some way, and he gets really annoyed. But I think the moral of the story, or like the purpose of it, is to show how important people are and the community around it. So he feels needed by all these people, so he's like, oh, I can't die today because I need to do this and I need to do that. And he ends up finding this friendship in these people around him that he actually just wanted to go away, and he thought they were really annoying, like his new neighbors, but he ends up connecting to them, which is what is important in life, is to have people around you who you can feel comfortable with. So the book has this really heavy topic, but it's made in like a funny way, like, dang, like I can't kill myself today because this neighbor is annoying me, or like she's knocking on my door, or whatever it is. So it's a very funny book, but a very important and sad topic at the same time. And I loved it. I love Frederick Bachman, but this one, I don't know if it's older than the other two. I mean, My Friends is his newest book, but I love his writing in those two books, and I did like the writing in this one, but just it's not the same. It's not the same. After A Man Called Ove, I read a non-fiction book, which is Tuesdays with Morrie, and I actually didn't know originally when I put it on my TBR that it was a non-fiction. I didn't know it was a real story, but turns out it is. And it's like a 150-page book or so not super long, but it's kind of a biography. We have our main character, and who is the author, Mitch, and when he was in college, he had his favorite professor whose name is Morrie. And when he graduated, he promised Morrie that he would keep in contact, but life happens and he didn't, and now it's been decades later. Mitch one day sees a news story on TV about Morrie, who has been diagnosed with ALS. If you don't know what ALS is, it's also known as, I think it's Lou Gehrig's disease, and I can't exactly explain what it is, but I know it's like you lose function in your body and slowly everything like dies. You lose function and like feeling in your arm and your legs until everything stops, and you'll lose the ability to breathe and to eat. So the story in Tuesdays with Morrie is that Mitch sees this story about him and he decides to visit Morrie. It ends up becoming a thing where he visits him every Tuesday because when they were in college, Tuesday was their days where he needed help with his school papers and whatnot. So every Tuesday he comes over, he has a little recorder and he records his conversations with Morrie. What is so incredible, or was so incredible about Morrie when he was alive, is that even though he had this horrible diagnosis of ALS, he didn't let it stop him from being happy. He was so positive and he just refused to let ALS win over him. He knew he was going to die from it, but he still wanted to just be happy and positive and hang out with as many people as he could whenever they came over, and just he had this positive and beautiful outlook on life. And that's what the book kind of is. It's just a reminder of how precious life is and to do what you should be doing and not get trapped in, for example, trying to get the highest position in a career. Even if you don't actually enjoy it or love it, you should do what you want to do, because life is short and you don't know what can happen, and tomorrow isn't promised for anyone. It was a beautiful story and I rated it 4 stars. I sometimes feels a little bit weird and iffy to rate a book that is a non-fiction because it's actually a real story, but I'm more rating it so on, I guess, how it was written. It was a little bit rushed in some ways, and I saw a Goodreads review and I agree with that. It was sometimes a little bit like just being pushed so many like life lessons and whatnot, like life is great, life is awesome, kind of over and over again in just different formats and different ways. So it's kind of just like being forced down your throat that life is great and you should stay positive. And that is true, but it just maybe became a little bit repetitive in some ways. But I still enjoyed it and I read it fairly quickly because it's short. So I read it on a road trip actually. But after I read Tuesdays with Morrie, I read Broken Country, which is a historical literary fiction. Not entirely sure how you want to categorize this, but it takes place in, I believe it was the 60s. And our main character, Beth, she is married to her husband, Frank. One day her teenage love moves back into his childhood home, which was next to the property that she currently lives on, so very close, and his name is Gabriel, and he moves in with his son. And a thing about Beth and Frank is that 2 years ago they lost their own son in a horrific accident, so now Beth is trying to kind of connect with Gabriel's son. She becomes his, not nanny, but she goes over there when Gabriel still has to work and whatnot. She finds it hard both to be with the son because it reminds her so much of her own son that she lost, but also to be in such close proximity to Gabriel because of what happened when they were teenagers and why they even broke up in the first place. But what is interesting and like a little bit special about this book is there are a few chapters that happen in the present tense. So the whole story that we're following is actually not the present tense. So we see a few glimpses in the present tense where someone has been killed and someone has been arrested, and we're seeing scenes from the courthouse at the trial, but you don't actually know who died and you also don't know who is on trial. And that was very interesting, and I kind of thought I had guessed what it was that was happening even when I had been told more and like I knew who died and all that, but I still got it wrong. So that was very interesting. So it does have a little bit of like a murder mystery in a way, but not where you're like trying to solve it, or you're like, it's not like the mystery in the actual story, because that's just something that you see more towards the end of the book, when the past that we have been reading about leads up to the present. But I really enjoyed the book and I rated it 4 stars. I thought it was really good and I just wanted to keep reading. Like I really liked the writing style and the story in general. I thought it was very interesting to read about. The next book I read was Heart the Lover, which I had been anticipating, and I heard really great things about this book. People really seemed to love it, and it was actually quite a short read. I think it was only like 250 pages or so. It wasn't that long, but in the book we had this narrator and we actually don't know her real name. If I remember correctly, was told like it's like in the very last sentence or so of the book you finally know what her actual name is. But she's in college. She ends up meeting these 2 guys who are best friends. They're called Sam and Yash, and they live in this big house that is their professor's house, I believe, but he's out on sabbatical or something, so they're kind of house sitting and living there, and they nickname her Jordan. So that's what we know her as. The whole book is Jordan. and kind of a love triangle kind of happens. She starts dating Sam and they break up after a certain amount of time, and then some time later she ends up falling in love with Yash and they are dating as well for a while actually. And then something happens and then part 2 I believe started, and that is decades later, and Jordan is now, I think she's maybe in her 30s if not around 40. She is married, she has 2 kids and everything like that, and then she gets some unexpected news and she ends up having to step back into that world with Sam and Yash because of some very sad and unfortunate circumstances that ends up bringing them back together. I didn't love this book. I rated it 3.5 stars. I was a little bit disappointed by it, but I think it was the informal, well not maybe informal, but maybe impersonal way that it was written that I didn't really connect to it. And then because it was so short, I also felt it was a little bit rushed, so I never really connected to it. And the sad thing that happened in the end, I just didn't, not that I didn't care necessarily, but I didn't cry. It didn't like make me feel anything because I didn't feel like I knew the characters enough to actually feel emotions toward them because it was so fast paced, and the way it was written, it just wasn't for me, I guess, because I didn't connect to it, so I just didn't love it that much. That is just my personal taste and opinion. After that, I read The Night We Met by Abby Jimenez, which was another anticipated read for me. It came out in March and I've been waiting for it because I've read every Abby Jimenez book. I love her writing style and I was very excited to read this book. I have seen some mixed reviews and a lot of people are disappointed in this book, but I rated it 4 stars. I actually quite enjoyed it. It definitely has a very unique kind of premise that I was very nervous about, and even like halfway through I was feeling a little bit iffy or conflicted about if I actually liked it, but the way it wrapped up and the way it ended, I really enjoyed it. In the book we follow Larissa, and she met her boyfriend at a concert. She needed a ride home and he gave her a ride, and now they've been dating for a few months, but he has some issues and he's struggling with, so anytime that he fails to show up for her because of his personal problems, he calls in his best friend Chris, and Chris is our other point of view, and he is actually the real love interest in this story. So you can see why it's very unique, because the love interest is her boyfriend's best friend, which is definitely a very tricky situation to be in. But in the beginning of the book, Chris ends up having to take Larissa and her mom to the hospital because her mom needs a surgery or something like that, and they find a stray dog outside the hospital that he ends up taking home, but he works a lot so he can't take it out for walks and whatnot, so he wanted to give it back, but he didn't want the dog to die. So Larissa steps in and agrees that she can come over to his house and like take the dog out and walk it every day. So they kind of end up co-parenting this dog. And also for the rest of the story, the boyfriend, anytime he messes up and does something stupid like get drunk but pretends that he has a migraine instead, he calls in Chris. Chris, can you do that? Chris, can you go help her? Chris, can you drive her to the beach house they're going to? So they're kind of forced together a lot, and they don't mind because they are so similar. They both read books and they read some of the same books, and they just have so many things in common. They are perfect for each other, but again, obviously it's very tricky because it is his best friend. But I think the reason why our main character Larissa even likes her boyfriend is because all of the thoughtful, nice things that he does is not actually things that he does, but things that Chris does or helps him with, because the boyfriend doesn't actually really know her. He will ask Chris for advice. What should I give her for her birthday? What should I do? Can you do that? Or even things that the boyfriend doesn't even know has been done, Chris will do, and he will act like it wasn't him who did it. So in reality, she's actually in love with Chris, but she just doesn't know that all those nice things, all the redeeming qualities that her boyfriend has, is actually Chris. A negative thing that I saw people say is a big thing in this book, and the thing that people think it's talked about too much, is that Larissa has a deadly nut allergy. Like, she's allergic to nuts, and she has an EpiPen and everything, and she can't like be in the same room as nuts basically. So at her job, like, she works at a restaurant, but she can only work at a restaurant that has a menu that is completely nut free, and going to a restaurant and whatnot, she needs to find someone that doesn't have nuts in it. And it is talked about a lot, but to me it wasn't talked about too much because it was such an important point that the boyfriend, even knowing that she has this allergy, does not care enough the fact that she could literally die from it. He is not thoughtful enough to remove nuts and whatnot from a house that she's supposed to be staying in, or to use a different knife, just like different things to not contaminate any of her food. But Chris is like, he will call ahead to find a restaurant that doesn't have nuts. He will change out anything. He will look in a house and see if anything has nuts, or going to an event, he will try and find some food that she can eat that doesn't have nuts in it. So yes, it is talked about a lot, but I just think it proves the point that the boyfriend is not right for her because he needs to work out some things. But well, also, all that being said, I'm very excited because from what I've heard, the next book is actually from the boyfriend's. It's his love story, because the boyfriend isn't actually a horrible person. He's just going through some personal things. So yes, he was a bad boyfriend, but he's not a horrible person and he's working through it. That's what we see at the end of the book, is that he goes to therapy and he gets the help that he needs. So I'm very excited to read his love story and see him get his happy ending. And yeah, that was my thoughts on that book. I talked about a lot, but I think just because it's a very popular author and I wanted to give my 2 cents about the book because I see a lot of people not liking it. So I just wanted to talk about why I do. Those were all of the books that I read in March, and now we're moving on to the books that I read here in April. So the first book I read was Babel, or actually I listened to some of the audiobook and it said Babel, but I'm going to continue to call it Babel. So hopefully that's okay. It's a historical fantasy book, which I don't think I've read before. It takes place in the 1800s in England. We follow our main character, Robin Swift, who is an orphan because his family dies of cholera, and he is from China. He is Chinese, and this rich English man comes in, swoops him, takes him to England and gets him tutored in Latin and ancient Greek and Chinese so that he can be accepted into Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institution of Translation, which is also called Babel. So he goes to this school and he makes a few friends. They had this little friend group of 4 people, 2 girls and 2 guys, and they're all kind of outcast because it's 1800, so the women are even accepted at this school is crazy enough. And then the 2 guys are both non-white people. But the fantasy element of this book is that there is this magic system, and I've tried to explain it to some friends in real life and do a horrible job because I don't think they understand it, so I don't know how well I can describe it either. But it is silver bars. That's kind of like the magical system, is that there are these silver bars that are magical and they need language to be activated. So you need 2 words from 2 languages that, from what I understand, kind of have to mean the same thing. And to be able to activate the silver bar, you have to be fluent in those 2 languages that you are using. So that's why you have to learn multiple languages. So for Robin, he can make a silver bar using Latin and Chinese, for example, or English and Greek, whatever, like 2 languages that he can think in his head and like dream in those languages. And the silver bars are like magic. So you can activate a bar to do things for you. So it can make machines run faster or better or without humans' help because the silver bar has like taken over the process or whatever. I hope this makes sense. But just know they're magical silver bars that can do things. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. But the historical things and elements in this book as well is that it's also about the colonization. And in this book, it's about the languages, how they're like basically stealing languages because they're taking, for example, Robin and this other guy from their home countries to bring to England so that the British Empire can remain strong, which is what was happening back in those days. In general, the British Empire was colonizing everywhere. That's why so many places speak English, because they colonized it and took over those countries. So that's what this book is about. And it's also about a revolution because there's talk of a possible war against China. So now Robin has to decide whether or not if he is on England's side or if he's on the Chinese side, because he is still Chinese. So it was interesting, but I did find it a little bit boring because the language parts was it was a little bit too much explanation and talked about what different words meant or where they stemmed from what I was like interested in, so it was just a little bit boring to me. And it's a 550-page book, and I enjoyed the last 200 to 250 pages, but I was like considering DNFing it, but my friend really loves the book and she told me to keep going, and I did, and I'm glad I did because I did like it, and the ending was crazy. So yeah, I would recommend it if you would enjoy things like that. I don't know if I knew what it was really about if I would have read it, just because, yeah, I don't know. But nonetheless, I read it, and it was my first R.F. Kuang book, and I'm happy that I can say that I read it. The next 3 books are also all in a reading vlog in my reading anticipated books that I thought could potentially be 5 stars because I'd seen very great reviews about them. So I'm also going to talk about them a little bit faster because you can go watch that video if you want to hear more in depth my thoughts on them. But the first one I read was The Road to Tender Heart, and in this book we follow PJ, who is, I believe he's in his 60s, and 10 years ago he won the lottery and he became a millionaire. He won $1.5 million, and he's very proud and happy about that. But unexpectedly, he becomes the guardian of 2 young children, a boy and a girl, and they're actually his estranged brother's grandchildren, but he hasn't talked to his brother for the last 40 years, so he didn't even know these children existed, even though they actually lived in the same small town. But he ends up becoming the guardian of them, and he also finds a cat named Pancakes. And a weird thing about this cat is that it can predict death, but no one really knows that, but it will comfort you and like want to sit with you and whatnot, and then one day you'll die and you didn't know that was the reason why it was cuddling with you, because it knew that you were close to the end. Enough about the cat. In the book, PJ, the 2 kids, and the cat, and also his 26-year-old daughter, who he has kind of a doesn't have the best relationship with, because PJ is also an alcoholic, so the daughter is not his biggest fan, but she ends up agreeing to go with them on this cross-country journey road trip to help take care of the children and to spend time with her dad. So they end up driving from Massachusetts to Arizona because he's trying to find the love of his life, who he hasn't seen since he was 18 years old before he got shipped off to the Vietnam War, and when he came back she was unfortunately married. So now he is determined to find her because he saw in an obituary for her husband that he's now dead, which means she's single for the first time in 40 years, and he's obsessed. So he's determined to go find her and woo her and steal her away. I rated this book 3.5 stars. I didn't love it. It's a very sad and traumatic book, but written in a very funny way. And that's also what the author wrote in the acknowledgements at the end, that she wanted to write the most traumatic book that she could in the most funniest way possible. And I think that can work sometimes, but it didn't fully connect to me. I did enjoy it, and I especially enjoyed it in the beginning, but the more I read, the more I just kind of wanted to be done with it. So I didn't love it, but you can hear all my thoughts in my reading vlog. And the next book I read was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. And before I talk about it, just know that I did not end up writing this book, and I don't plan on writing this book. It is a literary historical, I don't know if it's historical because it is like in newer times, but it's definitely a very important topic, especially in today's age. In the book we follow Salama, who is an 18-year-old girl in Syria. She was studying to become a pharmacist, but a year ago a revolution broke out, and she has now been forced basically overnight to become a surgeon, a doctor, and everything, trauma doctor at the ER at the hospital, at her local hospital. She's there every day. She literally like performs surgery and sews up people who have been shot and bombed, lost limbs, and everything else, trying to help these people survive. And her mom is dead, and her dad and brother have both been taken prisoner, and she's hoping that they're dead because it's a better fate than the prison that they are potentially in, being tortured every day. So her and her sister-in-law, who she lives with, Layla are both kind of hoping that they're dead, even though like for Layla, the brother is her husband and she's 7 months pregnant, so he's the father of her child, but she would rather him be dead than be tortured every day, because who knows if they will ever get out of there. And Salama has promised her brother that she's going to get Layla out of Syria, so she's trying to make a deal with this doctor at the hospital to get a boat to Europe so that they can get out of Syria and survive, because even just walking home from the grocery store, there are snipers who will shoot you down and bombs will fall on you, and so many houses have holes in them and it's horrible. And the story also have a romance, because she meets this guy named Kenan, who was actually supposed to be like an arranged marriage between the two of them, but the day before they met was the day that the revolution broke out. But because his sister got hurt, she ends up meeting him anyways and they end up connecting. So there is a little bit of a romance going on as well, but mostly the story is about this revolution and about how horrible it is to live in these circumstances and how they have to literally escape their home country, even though they don't really deep down want to, but they want to survive, so they have to anyway. And I just thought it was such an important book that I didn't want to rate it or put it like on a rating scale saying that this was a 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, whatever, because to me, while it is fictional characters, it's so important and such an important story that I didn't want to rate the actual book itself or the rating or the writing or the characters or anything like that. I just want people to read it to understand, and especially again in today's age where so many immigrants are fearing for their lives everywhere, and especially in the US right now where so many people are being deported, and this will just definitely have you like give you so much empathy to these people who don't actually want to leave their home countries, but they have to if they want to survive. So yes, those were my thoughts on that book. The second to last book that I have read in April is The Name, and this was my second 5-star read of the year. I have read about, I think it's 31 books now, and this was the second 5-star read, and I'm very, very excited about it. In the book, in the first chapter, we meet Cora. She has a 9-year-old daughter named Maya, and she has her husband Gordon, who is an abusive husband, and they just had a baby boy, and she has to name him. But in Gordon's family, it is a tradition to name every son Gordon, but because her husband is abusive and not a very good person, she doesn't actually really want to name her son the same name as her abuser. So the uniqueness and very interesting in this story is we see Cora having to go register her baby's name, and then from there on out we get 3 parallel lives. One where she calls the baby Bear, which is what her daughter Maya would have named the baby if she could choose. Then a second life where she calls the baby Julian, which means Sky Father, because Maya apparently means mother, so she wanted to name something like Sky Father, like she's above the father. And then a third life where she named the baby Gordon, like she's supposed to do. So for every chapter it changes between these 3 lives. We see the first year when the baby is just born and has been given the name of Cora telling her husband that she's named the baby these 3 names, and then after 3 chapters of the baby being a newborn still, it skips 7 years. We see the child as a 7-year-old, and it continues to skip 7 years. So you get 1 chapter per life every 7 years up until he is 35 years old. And the very interesting and so beautiful thing about this story is you see these 3 lives and none of them are perfect. No matter what she names her child, there is some bad that will happen in every lifetime, but there's also some good things that will happen in every life. And it's such an important lesson that no life is perfect, and no matter what you will do, there will never be a perfect life. There was always something that will outweigh the good and it will be bad. So you can't even really have like which one of them will you prefer, like what should she name the baby, because no matter what, there is something negative about all of these lives. And the story also portrays and shows how such a small thing as just changing the name will change so much. And I was talking about it with my friend and she couldn't really understand why there would even be a difference in the 2 names that the husband didn't want, because you know, you think he would be mad in those 2 and then he will be glad when the baby name is Gordon. The difference is like what happens in those 3 initial chapters. Those change the trajectory of the lives for the rest of the time in the rest of the chapters is Gordon's, the father's, reaction to the three names. The reason why it's different between Bear and Julian even is the reaction, and that in one life the daughter is there when she tells him and it's during dinner, and in another life she's not there and something else happens that changes their life. So it's very different in all three. Like, they live very different lives in these three parallels, but I just thought it was so interesting. And then in all three lives as well, we also get a depiction of domestic violence and how different outcomes can turn out in a domestic violence situation and how hard it can be to leave. So I thought it was so good, and the writing was really beautiful. I highlighted multiple quotes and I shared some of those quotes in my reading vlog where I read the book. I am obsessed. I think the book is so good. But the last book that I read in April is Shield of Sparrows, which was in my 26 books I want to read in 2026. It's a fantasy book that I really wanted to read, but I haven't been in a big fantasy mood. So now I was, and I finally picked it up, and I'm glad I did. I rated it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. In the book we follow Odessa, who unexpectedly ends up in an arranged marriage to Xavier, who is the crown prince of another kingdom, because she lives in this like world or land named Calandra, and there are 5 kingdoms, and for the last, I don't know, 300 years or so, they have this Shield of Sparrows, which basically means that one daughter of a king has to be married off to another kingdom to make sure that there's peace, and that the heir that comes out will now be bonded to 2 different kingdoms so that no kings will try to fight another kingdom. And in Odessa's life, it was supposed to be her sister May who was gonna be the princess who was married off, but out of nowhere they decide, like the prince who is marrying, that they want her instead. So now she's being married off, she's going to another kingdom, and this kingdom is filled with monsters, and there's like some disease that is going on. So these monsters, some are infected with this disease, which makes them even more deadly and horrible. They will do anything to kill you, and not just for hunger anymore. They're basically killing for sport, like they're bloodless. And while all this is going on as well, she is also falling in love, but not with her husband. She is falling in love with the Guardian, and I love him. I love it. I love the romance, and I actually just finished this book literally last night, and I've started the second one, which will probably be the last book that I read in April, because I do have to film this video a week before April is over, because I'm going to London, which next week's video will be from my trip to London, and I'm so excited. Actually, the next 2 videos will be from London. I literally can't wait. So I potentially will have finished that book, maybe, in the next week, but it's still in the same like realm of world, so it's not like I can say much other than my rating. Maybe I can write something on the screen. If I have finished the book by the time I edit this video, then I'll put my rating of the next book, which is called The Right of Starling, I think. The Right of, actually can't remember. Yeah, Shield of Sparrows, I really enjoyed it. It is a bit long, and I did think it is like 700 pages, and maybe sometimes it was a little bit drawn out, which is why it was like a 4-star and not like a 4.5 or more, because I feel like the plot wasn't moving too much. I can definitely tell now, like with the second one, something is going to happen, but not a lot was happening plot-wise in a 700-page book, in my opinion. But I still really definitely enjoyed it, and I'm very excited to read the second one. And if you read Shield of Sparrows, I just want to, like, I'm just saying, like, the twist that happened, I guessed it literally from the get-go. Literally, maybe the first, like, one of the first chapters, I was like, this is what's gonna happen, and it did. I wasn't very surprised at that, but nonetheless, those were all of the 15 books that I have read in the last 2 months, and it's been a great reading month. I've had some great books, I've had some not so great books. It's been a very interesting 2 reading months. I've read a lot of the books that have been on my TBR that I've been wanting to read, so now I can cross those off, obviously. And then I found a new 5-star read, which is obviously always amazing. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!